This edition of our podcast is brought to you by 360 Health and Well Balanced Nutrition.
Welcome to the Health Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
Hello, everybody. It's Kristen and Eleanor with Health Geeks Book Club podcast. And today we have selected a book, and I'm not really sure how we found this book either. We tend to find them, and Kristen often says they're from the
Amazon bestsellers list.
That's right. Yeah. So we were trying to stay current out here in this body of literature. And this book's title is Your Body in Balance by Neal D. Barnard. And we're going to tell you a little bit about the people that wrote this book, because Your Body in Balance is the new science of food, hormones, and health.
And it is a new book. It was published in February of 2020. So definitely fresh.
Just before the great pause.
Exactly. The great pause. So we always ask, who is this author? So Dr. Barnard is a medical doctor, and he did his training at George Washington University School of Medicine and then practiced at St. Vincent Hospital in New York. And then what he's perhaps most famous for is he went on to create the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, which is an organization to help promote prevention and good nutrition in the field of medicine.
I'm so excited about that.
Right? He is an adjunct college professor and a fellow of American College of Cardiology. So what is a adjunct college professor?
Well, as I understand it, there's different ranks in the tenure process, and if you have terminal degrees, you can qualify to be in that chute. And an adjunct professor usually is somebody that's just on the side. Adjunct, tacked on. And they can be a variety of responsibilities. They can maybe teach one class or give a lecture or do a little research project or whatever. It's just not a full-time commitment to the academic institution, as I understand it.
Okay. So, he may work with the college, but he's not a full-time professor.
Yeah, because he's probably very busy with a private practice. And according to the insert here, it looks like he's written about 20 books. So He's an active author.
He's a very active author, really active in research. And one research project was federally funded. And in what I read, has revolutionized the nutritional approach to type 2 diabetes. Yeah. So he's moving waves out there.
I like it.
And there's no doubt that he's very passionate about
and he's kind of cute, too. At least from the picture on the book jacket.
Yeah. So there's two overarching ideas in this book. One is that...
Wait. I want to talk about that other author.
The other author, okay.
Yeah, Lindsay S. Nixon.
She does the recipes in the back?
Well, I think so. It says With Menus and Recipes by Lindsay S. Nixon. And she's an author as well. And she's the CEO of Happy Herbivore.
Oh, that's right.
Incorporated.
Yes.
Yeah, and she has written several books in this arena, and they all have Happy Herbivore in them. She is trained, though, in the classics and communication. And she has a law degree from the University of Charleston, or College of Charleston, and the New England School of Law. So I thought, well, here's an interesting thing. You got this chef who's a lawyer who's partnered up with this amazing fella in the nutrition, sciences with a medical background. And then the people that wrote about, recommending the book to us were kind of interesting, too. I cannot say this gal's name, Mayim Bialik. She was on... Thank you. That's it. Yeah, so she's on the Big Bang Theory, but she's also the neuroscientist and actor extraordinaire.
That was Mayim Bialik, actually. I didn't say it into the microphone. Sorry.
I knew I needed help on that, so thank you. We were talking about that. And then there's some world-class athletes and cyclists. So this book is being read through a variety of audiences, and we're glad to bring it to you today. I'm with 360 Health, and we make healthy happen. And Kristen, you want to tell us what you're doing?
And I'm with Well Balanced Nutrition, a registered dietitian and nutrition coach. And it just so happens we're going to get into nutrition today.
There we go. Yeah.
All right, so we're ready to dive into what this book is about?
Absolutely. I'll let you do that now.
Okay. So there's two overarching ideas, and one is hormones conduct many processes in our body, and they can increase or decrease our metabolism, alter our mood, control our reproductive system, and so on. And therefore, an imbalance or a hormone disruption is at the root of many of our health problems. Mm-hmm. And the second idea of this book is that animal products are causing hormone haywire, and eating plant-based will help keep our hormones balanced and functioning well. Mm-hmm. So, yes, it is very strong plant-based argument in this book, which is interesting because he doesn't lead you to think that based on the title of the book.
Oh, no.
Not one bit. So part one is dedicated to sex hormones, and it goes into fertility, PMS, PCOS, menopause, and as well as breast and prostate cancer. Mm-hmm. Part two is about metabolism and mood and covers thyroid, diabetes, mood, skin, and hair. And then finally in part three covers what he thinks is a healthy diet and how to avoid environmental chemicals.
Yeah, so for people who are light on the reading, of heavy reading, they might like to just jump to part three, and look at what he says you should do. But what Kristen and I are going to talk a little bit about is how he came to the conclusions, I think, on his recommendations and what we think about them. And right. I was going to say, before he got started, one of us doesn't like to read the forewords and things like that, and that would be our producer. But he has a note to the reader in here, and he does have a disclaimer, and the publisher has a disclaimer on this book as well,
right?
Which we're finding is sort of standard in these books that we're reading. But it says, if you have health conditions or use medications, see your healthcare provider, and that's in bold print. So he is saying right up front, even though my title doesn't tell you what we're going to do, be sure you have your team apprised of whatever you take out of my book, right, to practice with. And then the other thing he says is get complete nutrition. And, of course, that's where we're going to go. Because I think Kristen has some interesting comments about the complete nutrition.
Yeah, I also think in the I also want to note in the forward, or maybe it was in the introduction, mm-hmm. that he does say the science that we're going to dive into is not complete, and it is still new, and our journey is not over. And that's the only time that was kind of mentioned, because throughout the rest of the book, I noticed he's just very enthusiastic about the plant-based diet, whereas I've noticed that, at least in some cases, the science behind it is not as compelling as he might make it seem.
Right. Yeah. But I do think his enthusiasm for let food be thy medicine, which is something that a lot of us have ignored, that, our food does feed our cells, and we need certain things in our diet for our bodies to function properly. Is just where do we get those nutrients, and what quantities, and, how are they prepared? Those sorts of things get to be the confounders for a lot of us, because we're trying to make sense of how do we feed ourselves. He has a little bit of critique in his book, too, about his peers in the medical. He started the thing.
The Physicians Committee.
On functional medicine?
Responsible medicine.
Yeah, responsible medicine. And kicking the fire up under prevention, which I'm all for. So I kind of am an advocate for this guy. And he's has some comments like, why didn't my doctor tell me? And there's some other comments that I want to highlight as we get in here about recommendations for pharmaceuticals that are coming from doctors that are concerning to me and some other folks as well. But I do think the science, I think a lot of the authors that we're reading, they're writing for the popular press. And not all the readers have an in-depth understanding of the intricacies of science, nor do they want to, and nor do they want to dig down underneath and see it. So those of us that do like to do that get a little concerned when someone says something sort of light touch on the surface and the underpinnings aren't there.
Right.
But it is a challenge for the author to get his ideas out there without bogging people down in that. So I'm understanding the conflict a little better as we get into this journey we're taking, because I just want to say, those chemical bonds aren't like that.
Right. Well, and it's such a good point that you want to be honest and upfront about the research, but you also want to captivate your audience, and not all of your audience is, going to be wanting to hear the science details and all the nitty gritty.
Yeah, but that's where you can be misled sometimes.
Exactly. Exactly.
And he does have a good bibliography. I mean, you look in the bibliography, and it's a pretty substantial reference set. So if you wanted to go dig in there and see if you really agreed with him, you could do that.
Right.
He's given you the trail.
Yeah. And I did on a couple of those things. Yeah. And then the first introductory podcast, I said, I don't read research. Well, and that's not completely true. It's not my favorite thing to do, but I've definitely gone back and tried to fact check some of these things that I found interesting. And not even just fact checked, but like understand where that statement is coming from and what was the underpinnings of it, like you said. So you also mentioned that you can kind of jump to the back into part 3 and read this, but you can also, he says in the beginning, you can look if like you're interested in thyroid issues. You can just skip to that and see what he has to say. I'm wondering, is there anything that stood out to you in part 1 or 2?
Yeah.
Tell me.
Well, let's see. In part 1, that's the sexy chapter, right?
Yeah, the sex hormones.
Yeah, sex. So there's a whole lot of interesting stuff in there that would grab, I think, our readers' attention, but he refers to some substantial studies. The Nurses' Health Study is a body of data that is referenced a lot, and he talks about kind of a light touch on fat and their little hormone factories. Your fat cells can make estrogens and estradiols, things like that. But they also make or decrease the sex hormone binding protein that floats around that ties this stuff up. So if you get excesses of these hormones, they can cause havoc. Like we were saying, any irregularity in the balance of these things can cause some disturbances. And so he talks a little bit about fat in your diet, and he's going to develop that later, about animal fats versus vegetable fats. But he talks about fiber for fertility, And a lot of us don't think about fiber having anything to do with our sex life. And I thought that was kind of an interesting read. The idea that most Americans do not get enough fiber in their diet. Is that something you know?
I talk about fiber all the time. I'm bringing sexy back.
I like that.
Yeah. No, I liked that a lot because he went into the power of fruits and vegetables in particular with that fiber and how increasing the vegetables had like a 50% reduction in your cancer risk. Is that, am I remembering that right?
It's significant.
Yeah,
we don't have to worry about if we get the percentages accurate, but significant. And then that same chapter, he was talking about the go dairy free.
Oh yeah.
And
he really bashes dairy.
Yeah, and he went into the sugar that's in your dairy as lactose, and that when you break that down, you get a galactose. See, this is where most readers probably don't want to see what's the difference in those two words, and it gets a little confusing. But what he's talking about is that the byproducts of the lactose are sometimes not good for us, and we become intolerant, and then we jack up the insulin resistance and those sorts of things. Not only that, but the additives to the dairy process, the farming practices.
Right, where they pump them up with hormones to
make
try
the
to
milk
produce
production.
more milk.
And then that gets carried into the milk product itself. And so he thinks it's good to be lactose intolerant, which most of us are as adults. And when we look at cuisine across the world, there are cultures that don't use creams and milk products in their daily habit, and they have pretty good health statistics. Like if we look at the Asian cuisine, not a lot of cheese, not a lot of milk, and lower incidences of some of our cancers.
Well, I can't get on board that saying all dairy is bad, but I also am not on the other side. So I did my internship with the Dairy Council. And it was funny because I was just excited to get that internship because they had a lot of money, and that means we get to go out to eat a lot and do all kinds of cool things.
And cheese.
and cheese and milk. And now looking back at it, it's like, oh, they have a lot of money, and they've influenced how we think about dairy so that we can always think of it in this positive light, and we need more and more to be healthy. So I'm kind of in the middle on dairy. I don't think that everybody needs to avoid it completely, but I also don't think we need to push it 3 servings a day to be healthy.
And the only source of calcium.
And right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody can tell you where calcium comes from except from milk. You know, when you ask people.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
it's in milk and cheese. Oh, yeah, okay.
Right.
And I need that for my bones.
Yeah, healthy bones. Where else
Le-
is
leafy
it?
greens.
Leafy greens and broccoli and Brussels
All
sprouts.
those wonderful things, those plants. Yeah. Well, do we want to talk any more about the sex hormones and stuff? I mean, we can talk about the sperm production going down in the United States.
Okay.
Well, I don't know that I want to say too much about that, except there are trends that the sperm counts are going down in the United States, and there are some suggestions that maybe the way we're eating. Of course, it could be the way we're stressing ourselves. It could be the lack of exercise and sleep, as we've read as well. So I don't think there's one rule here necessarily.
And I do like that he highlights that fertility is important for both male and females, right? It's not just the woman's diet that needs change or lifestyle. It can also very much be both sides of it. And more dietitians are starting to counsel around that, around a male's diet leading up to when
that's
he
great.
wants to start a family. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Just read I won't diverge, but I did read another book that this topic came into, and it wasn't a science book. It was called The Girl with the Louding Voice. And it's a story of Nigerian women, and that might be a topic we could talk about another time because it had to do with slave trading, but it also involved a woman's journey and pregnancy and inability to have children, and determining that it wasn't the female's problem, it was the male's problem. But all the confounders that go with that. I'm the older one in the group. You know, you've got the kids. Is there anything about your age group that came out in here? Because he does have a section on menopause.
He does. And before that, it was about PMS and PCOS. And nothing crazy to talk about, but there was a little interesting side note that stuck with me, and that is if you start your day with a plant-based protein, that women felt less moody throughout the day. That was the first I've heard of this. So, and then it could have been followed by a carbohydrate, but it was just a plant-based protein. Now, I've heard that absolutely about protein in general. Eggs, all kinds of protein, not just plant-based. So, I thought that was just a very interesting tidbit for when we're, going through our monthly mood changes. That maybe focusing on how you start your day could make a big difference.
And that could be nice for everybody.
That's right.
Yeah. And then as you get to the menopause conversation, I just got really interested because the trail that he did with the recommendations from the medical community, he has a story about when menopause became a diagnosis. And he talks about this in several places, that when you take a natural event and make it a disorder, then you can fix it. And in fixing it, then you have options for therapeutic, economic benefits to somebody.
A nice way to say someone's going to make money off of it.
Yeah. Oh man, I have watched, I'm a woman and I've been through things, and I've watched my friends and peers, and then you read the literature, and it's a complicated thing to age and to experience the hormonal changes with aging, and then how do you keep your personality in check? But the story of Premarin was the one that I kind of wanted to focus. Is that something we could talk about a little bit?
Yeah, let's dive in.
Yeah, it's around page 95 in the book, so it's a little bit in here, but they talk about Japanese women and even in the history of Mayan women, they didn't seem to have those difficulties that American women are having, or let's say industrialized women with hot
around
flashes.
menopause.
Yeah,
with hot flashes.
Yeah. So they came up with this idea that we could, in Canada, they marketed Premarin in 1941, and Premarin is urine from horses. And so they took some of the estrogen out of that, and they did a sales pitch, and it went crazy. And then they used sheep ovaries. It became the #1 drug prescribed in the United States. So here's, the female population in the United States is the target for the #1 selling drug, which I think is interesting. And there's a story in here about stilbestrol, and I worked on a project back in the 90s that was with diesterol stilbestrol, which is the DES story. And in the 70s, late 60s, women were finding out that if they had taken that drug during their pregnancy, the children, female children of that pregnancy, had anomalies, anatomical anomalies with their reproductive tract and also infertility. And it bubbled back up. In the 50s, women were wanting to stop spontaneous abortion. So this synthetic estrogen was discovered. And they decided, let's give it to these women and we can maintain those pregnancies, which was a gift. People got to carry their pregnancies at term and birth healthy babies. But those children, when they got to the reproductive age, were damaged by that exposure. And that's one of the cases where we began to say we need informed consent. Before you take a new drug or a new procedure, you'll sit with your providers and they'll go through a pretty lengthy informed consent. So this estrogen story is interesting, and I like that this guy came into it and said, look what happened when we did with the hormone replacement therapy and the Premarin. What was happening to women was we were increasing their cancer risks by giving them something, to help with hot flashes and just moving through this phase of their life. And he ends up with a pretty caustic statement to his peers about, don't do damage. We're supposed to do no harm.
Exactly. Yeah. And how we have to think twice about a medication that might help, but also have serious
And then what he says is
long-term consequences.
There are other choices, and he does talk about trim your weight down a little bit so that the fat cells aren't going to be an issue, and then favor soy products. Which you mentioned, a protein. Now, soy is going to give us protein, so maybe there are other ideas. And then there's some herbs, black cohosh and red clover are options for people. And it is devastating to have these hot flashes. I know women that have really just been, they can't function because they're just sweating and hot and just can't get control of their temperature. Sleep is interrupted. So we do need to address it. But I used soy when I went through, and I did the soy in the morning, and it worked.
Oh, that's in decreasing your hot flashes?
I didn't have any. Well, I have to ask the people around me. They'll probably say I had some problems, but I felt like I could go do the things I want to do. So I do think nutrition, and I like the fact that this fella is stopping and pausing and looking at Dr. Barnard and saying, docs, we need to look at this a little more carefully before we just pull out that prescription thing. And he also mentioned older trained doctors, particularly doctors in the South, continued to write those scripts even after the evidence was out there that said we shouldn't be doing this. They just didn't believe the Women's Health Initiative reports. And they said, well, I've always done it. I'm going to keep doing it. My women need this. I like the fact that we're getting information.
Yeah, I love that he is promoting food as medicine. And in the part 2 about metabolism, I really appreciate how he goes into, high fiber, low glycemic index foods, lots of fruits, vegetables, whole grains. He does, you mentioned fat earlier, he does encourage very low fat diet, which is interesting. I think the recipes in the back are going to be important if you want to try to follow this, because following, I think it's like 10 or 15% of your calories from fat.
Oh, okay. Because I was going to take issue with some of the recipes.
Oh.
Yeah.
I didn't look at
okay.
that
Well,
in depth.
since we're talking about it right now, yeah, I thought he said low fat, right?
Yeah.
And then he says use peanut butter and a lot of Thai dressings and tahini. And isn't tahini an oil?
Yeah.
That's what I thought. So he doesn't
Sesame
call it an
seed
oil.
oil.
Yeah, it's pressed sesame seeds.
Mm-hmm.
So I just thought, well, here he's saying not do it, but his recipes were including some stuff that I really like that are
Right.
fats.
Right.
So I thought, well, okay, maybe this is all right.
Yeah, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. Well, to kind of wrap it up, do you have any kind of takeaways about this book in general or the author?
Well, the diabetes conversation, I thought that was wonderful. The diet, lifestyle, when you're pre-diabetic or when your blood sugars are going up, lifestyle and diet, we're seeing evidence, strong evidence that can prevent the onset of the actual diagnosis, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, and you can turn that the pre-diabetes around.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely important. So one thing I noticed is that Dr. Barnard is, like we said, really good at convincing us that a plant-based diet is helpful for many common health concerns. And in his writing, it makes it seem like a fully plant-based diet is powerful and even an easy lifestyle change, which that's where I take some issues with. Because in my opinion, he's a little overly optimistic about the simplicity of following a completely vegan diet. Don't get me wrong, I'm a plant pusher. I think the more we get in our diet, the better. But I just don't agree completely with kind of the picture that he paints in this book. And like I said, I give him credit for saying that the evidence is still kind of young. But like in the skin care section, he referenced some young people who started an Instagram post. Well, we said that this book came out in February of 2020. So I went on Instagram to look at this account, and she's really struggling to follow a vegan diet. Mm-hmm. She's putting herself through like a 30-day challenge to be really strict with it. And then next is going to be a 90-day challenge. So that was just proof to me that, okay, he was acting like this was a done deal and she had fixed her acne problems. No, mm-hmm. There's still pictures on there and it's still an issue. So I love that he's enthusiastic, but I'm just like, my realistic view here is that, just promoting more plants in the diet, in my opinion, is a better route than promoting only plant diets, because the all or nothing has just set so many people up for failure, in my opinion.
Well, and he also says if you do that, you're going to go to the supplementation route because you need to supplement the vegan diet.
Yes, B12.
And omegas. Yeah, and a few other things in the vitamin D. He's which, me, I'm happy to help people get those supplements.
You've got the quality ones.
Yes, we do. And so that's fine. If you want to try it, I can help you. But I do agree, stringent. Didn't you say something about yo-yoing?
Yes, and actually we'll talk about that in another podcast coming up about how detrimental yo-yoing is. But yeah, I think that when we go for all or nothing, that we skip over the baby step part, which well-balanced nutrition is all about those baby steps. And in these stories, he has lots of case stories in this book. And I hate it when I see like a standard American diet compared to a vegan diet. And like, look, this vegan diet is amazing. Look how much energy they had and change. Well, anything is better than a standard American diet,
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, the sad diet.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's my only takeaway is that I love it. It's very encouraging for, trying more plants if you can get past his all or nothing approach to it.
Well,
and if you're ready to try.
Yeah, no, I agree on the nutrition side. And then he has a section on environmental exposures, which I really appreciated him including that, because it's not, your health is not just affected by what you eat, it's what's around you. And the things that your foods are stored in, the phthalates, the plastics, and what are those doing in the environment and bringing us problems that way. The pesticides that are used on our foods, being conscious of, knowing where your foods are coming from and what they've toxins they're potentially bringing to you is something we do need to be paying attention to. And he does talk about the Environmental Working Group and other agencies that can start to educate us about that and where our meats are coming from. Mm-hmm. If we're going to eat meats, then think about how are they grown and cared for, and what are they exposed to? Because things do they accumulate in tissues, so you can get doses of stuff you're not expecting to get.
Exactly.
So I thought it was good that he brought that up, and he mentions the genetically engineered ideas as well as what are we doing to our food sources with the genetic modification. Although, like you said at the beginning, we're just at the front end of understanding this with solid evidence. We have interesting anecdotes because he uses a lot of case studies, and that's a very low source of evidence in the science research. And then he's referenced studies that only have 14 people in them, mm-hmm. or whatever. So when we look at the Women's Health Initiative or the nurses study, they've got thousands of people. So the data becomes much stronger to draw conclusions from. And we just don't have that data right now, exactly. But we will. People are out there working in the research labs and fields trying to help us get the information.
That's right. If there's one thing we know, plants are very powerful, and I'm sure we're going to continue to learn more about them.
I do too. So would we recommend this book to somebody?
I'm a maybe. If you're interested in a plant-based diet and already leaning that way, then it's a great resource.
Well, and he does have a plan that goes over what you do on day 1 through 24 or whatever, and then he's got breakfast ideas, and there are nice plant-based recipes. I enjoyed looking through them. So I would think if someone's looking for a recipe book, they could get that as well in this book. And I think the hormone... I just want to put a caution on hormones. Endocrinologists study a lot to understand what these powerful chemicals are doing in our bodies. And when we start messing around with synthetic hormones, I just get really nervous. It's got to be under good supervision with people who understand what they're doing. And I've met people who are I'm in a network marketing company, and there are network marketing companies that are selling bioidentical hormones, and I'm thinking, how's that? I would be cautious. I don't know. This is personal opinion.
Right. Be careful with your hormones. Go natural when you can. Yeah,
and let nature be your guide. And the libido conversation was good in there. And I know a lot of couples have trouble with, one partner's got a high one and one's got a low one. But there's natural ebbs in our sexuality, and to start messing around with hormones can be complicated for other issues. Your heart, brain, everything.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think that's it for this book. Thank you so much for listening. Let us know what you think of the book if you pick it up. And you can find us on Facebook as the Health Geeks Book Club Podcast.
And I'm Eleanor Russell with 360 Health, and you can find me at 360health4u.com.
And I'm Kristen Norton with Well Balanced Nutrition. Find us at wellbalancednutrition.com.
And opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the expressed written consent of Kristen and Eleanor.